Cedar Point is a 364-acre amusement park located on a Lake Erie peninsula in Sandusky, Ohio. The park is world famous for having some of the most thrilling roller coasters in the world, and most coaster enthusiasts will make it a point to travel hundreds, if not thousands of miles to get to this place. Not only that, but Cedar Point is also well known for being one of the oldest amusement parks still operating in the world, with an opening that dates all the way back to 1870. It is most definitely a historic park, but it's only gotten better with age. At 17 total coasters, Cedar Point has what most would describe as having the single greatest roller coaster lineup at any park anywhere. Throughout the past few years, I've been able to get out to this park once in 2019 for 2 days, and a second time in 2020 for 1 day. Throughout these visits, I've been able to ride each and every single coaster in the park with one exception, Wilderness Run, which is a kiddie coaster manufactured by Intamin that I'm supposedly too tall to ride. Either way, I've certainly been able to recognize what coasters in the park are my favorite, so without further ado, this is how I rank the 16 coasters I've ridden at Cedar Point. Number 16, Woodstock Express. Built in 1999 by Vekoma, Woodstock Express is a kiddie roller coaster located adjacent to the aforementioned Wilderness Run, only this time I can actually ride it without having to worry about a height cutoff. This coaster has a pretty unoriginal layout and doesn't do anything particularly well, but I will say that the stats for a kiddie coaster are relatively impressive, and the little bell noises that can be heard throughout the layout adds a bit of character. As a whole, Woodstock Express gets the job done and serves as a step up from Wilderness Run. Number 15, Cedar Creek Mine Ride. In 1974, Cedar Point hired Aerodynamics to build one of their first mine train coasters. This one would be situated partially above a body of water and around the surrounding trees. This makes for a very beautiful setting, which is one of the few pros with this ride. Cedar Creek Mine Ride isn't too rough, but the layout compared to other mine trains I've ridden is genuinely boring outside of a couple sections where the ride picks up a bit of speed. Still, it's a decent family ride that I can respect for its historical value. Number 14, Iron Dragon. Another classic roller coaster manufactured by Aerodynamics is Iron Dragon, a suspended coaster that rarely ever gets talked about, but honestly, it's for a good reason. Iron Dragon is a decent little ride for what it is, but it's definitely at the bottom of my list for aero suspended coasters I've ridden. The ride's layout is just alright, even if there's 2 lift hill split mid-ride and a few good moments of sway around the trees, so it's worth doing once for the credit, but other than that, it's a pretty forgettable coaster. Number 13, Corkscrew. One of the most infamous roller coasters amongst coaster enthusiasts is Corkscrew, which is known to be a pretty rough ride, but I honestly think Corkscrew deserves some positive recognition every once in a while. It was built in 1976 and was the first coaster to ever invert riders 3 times during the layout. This is especially impressive because had it opened just a couple weeks earlier, it would have also been the first modern-day roller coaster to feature a vertical loop. Instead, that title belongs to the New Revolution, which operates at Six Flags Magic Mountain in California. As for the ride experience, I found it to be pretty underrated. You simply need to know how to ride these old Aerodynamics coasters, and from there it can actually be pretty enjoyable. In the back row, you are absolutely pulled over the ride's first drop, and just after that you get another moment of ejector airtime in the following hill. I honestly hope Corkscrew is able to stick around for the long run, because whether you like it or not, it's undeniably an icon for the park and it has a lot of awesome history. Number 12, Gemini. Yet another roller coaster built by Aerodynamics is Gemini, which is a dueling coaster with 2 sides, one with red trains and the other with blue. Now I'll admit, having Gemini at the number 12 spot seems super weird to me because it's actually a very fun family coaster, and in other parks, it would probably rank much higher. The ride is filled with several bursts of airtime and some fun train interactions, while also being a pretty smooth ride despite opening in 1978. Gemini is absolutely fantastic for what it is, but it still ranks pretty low in this list, further proving that this park's lineup of coasters is second to none. Number 11, Blue Streak. After talking about so many classic coasters, you'd think that'd be coming to an end, right? Well, Blue Streak is actually the oldest out of all of them, opening in 1964. The ride was built by Philadelphia Toboggan Coasters, and it shows that Cedar Point really knows how to maintain their classics. I actually love Blue Streak. It's always a treat to ride this thing. It features many airtime moments and some excellent pacing, while also being a visually appealing coaster both off-ride and on-ride. It's one of the few wooden roller coasters I've ridden that isn't brown and actually has a different color scheme. I also really like the trains, and the restraints aren't too restrictive, so overall, Blue Streak is a very solid classic wooden coaster. Number 10, Valravn. Valravn is a B&M dive coaster that broke a lot of records when it opened in 2016. This includes the title of the tallest, fastest, and longest coaster of its kind, but those records would later be passed on to Yukon Striker that opened at Canada's Wonderland in 2019. While Valravn undeniably has some pretty impressive stats, it actually sits at the bottom of my list of dive coasters I've ridden. Why is this? Well, one of the biggest reasons is that it was the first B&M dive coaster to utilize vest restraints instead of the classic over-the-shoulder restraints. These restraints are very restricting and take away any airtime you could have gotten otherwise. Another thing I dislike about Valravn in comparison to other dive coasters I've ridden is that there's no tunnels, splashdowns, etc. Shikara Busch Gardens Tampa fixes all three of these cons, so I consider that to be a much better dive coaster. In general, Valravn is a fun ride, but for the type of coaster that it is, it does quite literally nothing to stand out. Number 9. Rougarou. Ruguru opened in 1996 as Mantis, a stand-up coaster manufactured by B&M. Although I for one have never been bothered by the company's stand-up coaster design, most people consider these rides to be pretty uncomfortable, and because of this, Cedar Point replaced these stand-up trains with new floorless trains as well as gave the ride a new name and fresh coat of paint in 2015. To this day, Ruguru remains a somewhat controversial coaster amongst enthusiasts, and I don't really understand why. When I first rode Rougarou in 2019, I thought it ran just as well, if not better, than most of the floorless coasters I had ridden prior. The ride seems to be pretty smooth, forceful, and it even has an awesome layout. Matter of fact, I found the ride to be so underrated that I came back and did it a second time. This is a coaster I'll never understand the hate for, and I recommend giving it another shot in the back row next time you're at the park. Number 8. Wicked Twister. A coaster model that never seems to get much attention amongst roller coaster enthusiasts is the Intimate Impulse. I've been on a couple now and I always seem to love my rides on these. Wicked Twister in particular is the only one of its kind with a twisted spike on either side, rather than the usual layout which features one vertical spike and one twisted spike. Not just that, but Wicked Twister happens to be the tallest inverted coaster in the world, though I think people don't talk about that much because it's not a full circuit ride. Still, it's a crazy looking coaster and it's one that offers a very underrated ride experience. One of my favorite things about Wicked Twister actually has nothing to do with the ride itself, but the wait times are literally never long for this ride, making it easy to marathon when everything else in the park is a long line. Also, one element that I'd like to mention is the backwards twisted spike, rising both forwards and falling down backwards. If you were in the back row, you get an amazing look inside the funnel and get a crazy amount of whip descending back into the station. Overall, this is an awesome Intamin coaster that deserves much more recognition. Number 7. Magnum XL200. One of my more unpopular opinions is that Magnum XL200 is genuinely an overrated roller coaster. Many Cedar Point fans will go as far as to say that Magnum is in their top 5 or maybe even top 3 in the park, and me personally, I just can't see it. Much of the layout is honestly quite boring and the turnaround section is just straight up bad. There's nothing good that comes out of that element for me, mostly because of the track profiling which just isn't done smoothly. So with all these negatives out of the way, what does this ride do that puts it all the way up to number 7, above rides like Ruguru and Wicked Twister that I only had positive things to say about? Well, that's an easy answer, the ejector airtime finale. This is essentially several triangle-shaped airtime hills that provide some of the most violent ejector airtime you can get on any coaster. This is one of the best endings to any coaster for me, and it's truly the saving grace for this ride. Also, the historical aspect is one worth mentioning, as this coaster was the first coaster on Earth to climb over 200 feet in the air while utilizing a full circuit layout. It was revolutionary when it opened, so that alone is something I have to show some appreciation for. Magnum is a rock-solid ride for sure, but just not one that I think deserves all the praise it gets. Number 6. GateKeeper. With well over 200 roller coaster credits, you'd think I'd have been on quite a few B&M wing coasters, right? Well, believe it or not, this was my first and still the only traditional wing coaster I've ridden, but it gave me quite a good first impression because GateKeeper is a ride that I think deserves much more positive attention than it gets. And yes, I know that's a reoccurring theme in this video outside of what I said about Magnum. This ride gets very little praise, but it's honestly so much fun. Being seated on the outside of the track is a very weird sensation while taking all of these giant inversions in, but it actually works very well on a ride like this. Part of the reason is because they were able to use it as an advantage. For example, the keyholes that make up the front entrance of Cedar Point are fantastic near-miss moments for onboard riders. Also, this coaster is absolutely beautiful. It complements the park's skyline very well and provides a spectacular view of Lake Erie. In my opinion, GateKeeper is one of the biggest sleeper hits in the park. I always try to ride it every single visit. Number 5. Raptor. Raptor is an old-school B&M invert that was built in 1994, and it's one of the first roller coasters you see walking into the park. As a whole, it provides a pretty awesome ride experience too. Out of the many inverted coasters I've ridden, I'd argue that Raptor is one of the most intense. Almost all of the elements and inversions on this ride are super whippy and powerful, most notably with the 0G roll, 2 corkscrews, and the Cobra roll, which speaking of, Raptor's Cobra roll was the first ever to be featured on an invert. Also, for its age, this coaster runs pretty smoothly as long as you keep your head forward. Raptor checks off all the boxes for the ride that it is and complements the park's lineup very nicely. Number 4. Millennium Force. In the year 2000, Cedar Point would choose to debut what would become one of the most world-famous roller coasters ever built. This is mostly because Millennium Force broke so many records when it opened to the public. It was the tallest full-circuit roller coaster, breaking the 300-foot boundary with a lift hill rather than a launch. This and Magnum were arguably the two coasters that really kicked off the coaster war, where parks just wanted to keep on shattering records building the tallest and fastest roller coasters in the world year after year. How's the ride itself though? After 20 years of operation, I can safely say that Millennium Force is an outstanding ride. The view of Lake Erie from the top of the lift hill may just be one of the most immaculate views you can get on any coaster, and just after that, you'll plummet down the ride's giga-sized first drop. A giga coaster is any full-circuit roller coaster that has a height or drop that ranges from 300 to 399 feet in the air. This ride just so happened to be the first one ever built, and if you were in the front row, hitting the bottom of Millennium Force's first drop at 93 miles per hour is absolutely insane. The wind in your face is so powerful and the sensations provided are indescribable, but what I especially love is that the speed is maintained incredibly well throughout the entire ride. Millennium Force ranks in my overall top 15 list of roller coasters I've ridden, and the fact that it's number 4 on this list is just mind-blowing. Number 3, Maverick. Maverick was the first ever Intamin Blitz coaster and it opened with rave reviews. The ride has an astonishing layout filled with some rapid-fire transitioning through twists, turns, and inversions. There's also 2 launches scattered throughout the layout, one of which acts as a lift hill that leads into the ride's signature beyond vertical drop. The second is a legitimate launch that accelerates the train to 70 miles per hour before blasting it out of a tunnel. Anyways, back to the drop since there's so much to talk about there. Although it's only 105 feet tall, it's probably my favorite of the many first drops in the park. Folding underneath yourself at 95 degrees is crazy and provides some very powerful ejector airtime. As for the rest of the layout, it's literally all standout elements, and I can go on and on about how amazing each and every single transition and airtime moment is. To keep it short, this is one of the few roller coasters I've ridden that I'd call perfect for what it is. In other words, there's literally nothing I would do to change Maverick. It's a flawless 10 out of 10 coaster to me, but it's only my number 3 pick, which means that the next coasters must also be 10 out of 10s, right? Number 2, Top Thrill Dragster. Here it is, my favorite 17 seconds on any coaster, and a ride that I often describe as, although not the best coaster I've ridden, likely my favorite coaster I've experienced to date. The ride may be extremely short, but length has never bothered me on a coaster as long as it provides a crazy, exciting, and intense ride experience, which this thing absolutely excels at. As well as many other coasters in the park, Dragster also broke a bunch of records when it opened, only this time, it still holds the title of some crazy stats. It's the second tallest roller coaster in the world at 420 feet and the third fastest at 120 miles per hour. To get to that max height, you have to accelerate down a hydraulic launch track, which is where you'll hit 120 miles per hour one of 2 times. Not only is this the best launch I've ever experienced, but it's probably the single greatest element on any coaster I've been through. It's really that amazing. Following this, you shoot up the ride's 420-foot tall top hat and attempt to take in your surroundings, but before you know it, you are plummeting down a 400-foot spiral drop that leads into the second point of the ride where you'll hit 120 miles per hour. That right there is pretty much the whole layout, but with it being the most adrenaline-pumping roller coaster I've been on to date, it's always unforgettable. If you can snag a front row ride on Dragster, well that's pretty much as good as any coaster can get. Number 1, SteelVicious. This may not come as a surprise to anyone, but SteelVicious is the number 1 roller coaster on this list and as of now is the best coaster I have ever ridden. The ride is universally known by roller coaster enthusiasts for holding that title, and when it opened in 2018, the hype surrounding the ride was at an all-time high when compared to literally any coaster ever. There are so many things to love about this ride, but perhaps the best quality about SteelVicious is the sheer amount of ejector airtime. The ride has the most airtime on any coaster, and it is said that you are out of your seat for a total of 27.2 seconds. Now, it may seem like this number is an exaggeration, but I truly believe that it's not. The ride is very long, and you're getting a crazy amount of ejector airtime throughout the whole entire thing. The next thing I want to talk about is the unanswerable question of what's the best element on SteelVicious. Now, although I personally cannot answer that, I can touch on what the most standout elements are. That 90-degree first drop taken from 205 feet in the air has to be mentioned here, as well as the sustained outer banked airtime moment soon after. I also love the 0G roll variant that follows. This roll is taken so high off the ground and it seems to just keep on rotating. After a couple more airtime moments, you head straight into the mid-course brake run. That's right, all of these outstanding moments only made up some of the first half, but believe it or not, SteelVicious shines the most in the second half of the ride. There's a ridiculous amount of awesome elements to talk about here, but like I said with Maverick, this video would go on too long if I talked about each and every single one of them individually. What you do need to know is that the ride starts to weave in and around the wooded structure, and here you utilize little airtime hills, inversions, outward baking turns, and more. All of these crazy maneuvers lead into the finale consisting of 6 sudden bursts of ejector airtime. Every single time I've ridden SteelVicious, I've questioned what had just happened to my body by the time we'd hit the final brake run. You really can't tell which way is upside down or right side up, which is why SteelVicious is taking the number 1 spot on this list. Thank you for watching this video. If you haven't already, it would mean a lot to me if you could subscribe to the channel, as we are slowly but surely approaching a 1,000 subscriber milestone, and I'd like to remind you guys that every subscription counts. Again, thank you for the support, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye guys.